On behalf of Knox County Schools and the Social Studies Department, let me welcome all of you. I am Cassandra Jean, a social studies teacher at Fulton High School, and this is part 1 of the KCS Home Summer Activity Set for U.S. History. This video is designed to provide you with a brief introduction and overview of the task you will complete. The purpose of these tasks are to allow you the opportunity to learn the content from U.S. history that you may have missed out on due to the onset of COVID-19. In this case, our focus is on post-war U.S. history. So before we begin, let's review some options in case you have difficulties understanding the video. This slide will assist you if you have difficulties understanding the video stops playing frequently, or their streaming issues. So the first thing you can do is turn on closed captioning, which will essentially add captions to the video so you can read it as well as listen. The second thing is you can adjust the playback speed to slow down the video. So if the video is going too fast for you, adjust the playback speed in order to slow it down. The third thing you can do is consider watching short clips, then pause, listen, and watch again. The last thing is ask someone in your home to watch the video with you. Stop frequently and talk with your partner about what is heard and understood to make sure you are getting the full extent of the video. So this video will be exploring the 7th module of U.S. history, or the Cold War. So following World War II, the Cold War is going to be a period of global tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union. This increase in tensions will lead to massive impacts worldwide, including an increase in science and technology, an increase in foreign alliances, and an overall preparedness for another world war. So the time period we are exploring is 1945 to 1991. So if we recall, following World War II, most of the world was devastated. However, the United States and the Soviet Union weren't as devastated as the rest of the world, and they kind of remained as two of the only superpowers in the world. So they were left as the most powerful countries in the world. Yet they kind of had competing political and economic philosophies, which led them to become rivals in a confrontation that would span many decades. So as you know, the United States is capitalism, which means they have a lot of economic freedom. So you can be what you want, you can sell what you want, and the market kind of sets its own prices. The Soviet Union, however, is communist, which means the government controls all aspects of the economy, which means that the government decides what job you have, the government decides what to sell, and the government sets prices. So, as you can see, the United States and the Soviet Union are essentially polar opposites when it comes to their beliefs, and this is going to lead to tensions worldwide. So, if you recall, they were alliances or partners in World War II. However, the United States starts on this journey called the Manhattan Project, in which they were attempting to build an atomic bomb. And they are successful in building the atomic bomb, and it will destroy 2 major cities in Japan. However, the United States didn't tell the Soviet Union about their Manhattan Project, so the Soviet Union is going to be very upset by this. And this is going to kind of take the first step in allowing them to become rivals. So throughout this whole unit, we're going to be exploring the impacts of the United States and the Soviet Union being competing rivals. And the essential question we're going to be attempting to answer is, why did the United States win the Cold War? So I just want to preference that the United States winning the Cold War isn't going to be easy, and it's going to span many years. And at many points, the Soviet Union will be ahead, and the United States must decide how to respond. The last thing I want to talk about before we begin is this idea of a Cold War. So the Cold War is called the Cold War because it never actually heats up into a major global conflict. So even though we are prepared and we are ready in case a global conflict arises, one never actually rises. There will be some proxy wars, in which we will discuss later. So I am going to discuss the content in which each task overviews, as well as show you what the task will entail. There will be 6 tasks for this unit, and the first task is looking at this idea of containment. So as discussed, the spread of communism is going to be a major fear of many Americans because it kind of takes away economic freedom. And President Truman is going to see it as a threat to Western-style democracy and capitalism. Truman decided to combat communism through a strategy called containment. So this idea of containment was that the United States were going to contain communism. So it wasn't going to let it spread. So think about like a Tupperware. You're containing the food in there and you're not letting it seep out everywhere. The reason the United States chose containment as opposed to straight on battle or straight on invasion is for 2 reasons. First, the Soviet Union will eventually get an atomic bomb. And if we were to invade them, they might bomb us and kill many Americans. The second is many strategists or scientists thought that the Soviet Union would essentially end itself, because communism has a way of stifling or preventing economic growth. So because the United States has a superior economic ideology, it is seen that they will eventually come out as ahead. So your first task will be a Google HyperDoc. So if any of you haven't heard of a HyperDoc, it is essentially a Google Doc with hyperlinks in which you read about and answer the questions. So this HyperDoc is about containment, and you will have a little section in which you will read an article and answer questions about containment, as well as examine this cartoon. The second part will be a short YouTube clip discussing the Truman Doctrine, and you will answer these questions about the Truman Doctrine. The third part will be about the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan was the United States' efforts to rebuild Europe after the Second World War. So you will watch this short YouTube clip and answer these questions. And the last part will be exploring the alliances that arose in the Cold War. You will see NATO, which will be America's alliance, or the alliance of capitalist democracy countries, or the Warsaw Pact, in which you will see an alliance of communism and the Soviet Union. You will also see an alliance of SEATO, which is essentially Southeast Asian countries. And the last thing you will do is take all this information you learned throughout the hyperlinks and respond to this prompt, which is a question, and you will respond with a 4 to 5 sentence paragraph discussing your opinion of containment and whether it was a smart strategy. So after you finish with the task of containment, you will move to 2 tasks that discuss the impact at home. So even though the Cold War will have massive impacts worldwide, it will also have massive impacts at home. So the Cold War will lead to an arms race between the US and the Soviet Union. So what an arms race is essentially a build-up to see who will get the better weapon. So we will see an increase in nuclear weapons, both in number and in power. So in response to this, the United States is going to seek to protect and prepare its population for nuclear war. And also it's going to combat the fear of communism at home through the Red Scare. So there will be 2 tasks that go along with this idea of impact at home. The first task will be a short reading about the arms race and civil defense. So you'll read this and answer these questions about the arms race and then move on to civil defense. So civil defense is essentially the defense of your average person. So how the United States will react in case of national emergencies. And then they're going to create this federal civil defense administration, and this administration is going to distribute pamphlets, films, and addresses, as well as create a cartoon that will tell the American people what to do in case of a nuclear war. And this will be the idea of duck and cover. So American were to duck and cover if they ever heard the alarms of a nuclear attack. Now, we know that duck and covering will not really prevent death in a nuclear attack, but this gave the American peoples a sense of preparedness, so they weren't as scared for the upcoming days. The second thing you're going to look at is primary sources exploring McCarthyism. So we saw a rise of communism worldwide, so we were kind of scared as Americans about whether or not communism would reach the home front. So we see a rise of people such as Joseph McCarthy who are really pointing out communists. So you're going to read through these primary sources discussing a senator named Joseph McCarthy who was working with the government in order to identify communism in America. Essentially, he had no proof of communism. He was just pointing fingers. So after you analyze the 4 sources and answer the 6 questions, you will type a short paragraph evaluating McCarthyism based on the primary sources you read, and whether or not you think he was right in the actions he took and why or why not. So after you explore the impact at home, you will move on to exploring the 2 proxy wars. So even though there wasn't a major large-scale conflict, there will be several hotspots throughout, and 2 of them will be Korea and Vietnam. And both of these are going to be aimed to testing containment. So communism is going to attempt to spread into Korea and Vietnam, and the United States is going to send troops in order to prevent communist takeovers. And even though America was trying to contain these countries, the American people will eventually be against these wars, as many Americans are going to die in them, and you're going to see an impact and a rise of protests against wars in America during this time. So in exploring these proxy wars, you will complete 2 tasks. The first will be a text comparison. So you will read 2 tasks about the Korean, or 2 textbook excerpts about the Korean War, and you will try to determine, based on the 2 excerpts you read, who you think is more responsible for starting the Korean War. Is it Korea or the United States? So read these 2 excerpts and then compare them through answering these questions down here. The last thing you're going to do with Proxy Wars is a Google Map quest. So a Google Map quest is essentially a map that has points throughout in which you will read about and answer the questions. So if you look at the document, you see that each question shows you which marker you should be looking at. So the first marker you will be looking at is this purple marker. And you will read this and then use this information to answer the questions under number 1. Number 2 will be the black line. And you will follow throughout, clicking on each marker and answering the questions. This map is aimed to take you throughout the causes, the course, and the consequences of Vietnam War. So you will be able to explore like how it started, what happened during it, and what impact this proxy war leaves throughout the Cold War. After you explore the proxy wars, we come to the late 60s, early 70s, and this will be the decline of the Cold War. So beginning in 1969, the US is going to attempt to improve relations with the Soviet Union. So each United States president from 1969 up until 1989 is going to have their own ways of trying to improve relations with the Soviet Union. Over time, the Soviet Union is going to be weakened due to a declining economy. So if we recall back to the idea of containment, many strategists thought that the Soviet Union would eventually fall due to declining economy. And that's essentially what's going to happen. The Soviet Union is not going to be able to keep up with America in the arms race due to money and supplies. And the Cold War is going to come to an official end in 1989 with the fall of the Berlin Wall. So the Berlin Wall is going to be built in the 60s, and it's going to separate Eastern Berlin, the communist part of Berlin, with Western Berlin, the capitalist democratic section of Berlin. And in 1989, this wall is going to fall and the city is going to be reunited, and that's going to be an official end of the Cold War. So for this task, you will be completing a timeline quest. So a timeline quest is going to be similar to a Google Map quest, only it's going to be a timeline. So for each question, it's going to tell you what event to highlight, and then you will just highlight it, read about it, and answer the questions that follow. This timeline will aim to explain the developments in each president's actions in ending the Cold War. This will be the last task in your Cold War set, and this will be the end of the Cold War. The Soviet Union will eventually fall in 1991 and become Russia, in which it is today. So the sixth task I have explained will aim to allow you to understand both the events and the impacts of the Cold War and what impacts we still see today.